Welcome everybody to our discussion with the author Bridget Supple about her wonderful new book, The Birthkeeper of Bethlehem. Really lovely to see so many familiar faces with us here. Bridget, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to the readers, please?
Hi everybody, so I am Bridget and I am coming to you today from Shropshire, where I work as an antenatal teacher. So I trained as an antenatal teacher 20 years ago. I work at one of the biggest maternity units in the UK. I also work for a number of smaller units across the country. I lecture on brain development, the infant microbiome. I do a little bit of work for a lovely charity that supports pregnant women in prison. So I go into prison and work with women who are having their babies or are separated after they've given birth in prison. What else do I do? It's all in, I work on the International Journal of Birth and Parent Education. So everything I've been doing in the last 20 years has been in the field of sort of the perinatal period from conception to tomb. So that's me.
Wow, that is quite a CV. So obviously you're passionate about birth, and that was a major reason why you wrote this book. But what was it that sparked in your mind that said, right, I've got to write this now, and this is the way it's going to be? What was the inspiration behind The Birthkeeper of Bethlehem?
So going back, this is really embarrassing because it's going to tell you how long it took me to actually get around to writing this book down from the idea. But 15 years ago, when my littlest, because I have 4 children, so they were 6, 4, 2, and I had a newborn as well. He was about 3 months old at that point. And it was Christmas. We were at the huge excitement for Christmas. And it was one of those wonderful years where you've got 3 of them with the strong belief. So that, I mean, the house is pulsating with excitement in Christmas. And I've recently done some cultural awareness training in work in terms of being culturally sensitive around different practices after birth. And I'm looking at the nativity thinking, wow, that's not right. You know, there's the little model of Mary and Joseph and the cow and the sheep and the 3 kings, and thinking, well, that's not right, because of course in the Judaic tradition, there's no way a man would be at the birth, there'd be a midwife. And at that moment, Salome popped into my head, fully formed. I knew her, I knew who she was, I knew the kind of person she was, and she was just there. And I then subsequently found out that there was a midwife, believed to be a midwife at the birth, called Salome. So the chances are I had heard it somewhere at some point. Otherwise, she really did appear in my head. I'm going with the suspicion that at some point in history, it was something that I knew but didn't know I knew. But it was the weirdest thing. She literally popped up in my head, fully formed, and that was it. But then I had a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn, and it took me some time to get round to actually writing it. But that's how, just looking at nativity thinking, well, that's not right. So this year my nativity is having a midwife in it.
And it's that missing women in so much of history, but especially in so many of the Bible stories, and especially New Testament stories, that is just so, I think, what a lot of women really struggle with. And so I love your opening to the book. That just grabbed me straight away. Would you mind sharing it with us? Because just that sense of the missing women that we don't have in our history books, that we are reclaiming, rediscovering, recreating, because they were there. We might not know their exact stories, but they were most definitely there.
And yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that. I'll read the prologue and then we can talk about it.
Thank you.
Listening to the stories, you could think he only surrounded himself with men. We seem to have become invisible. But we were there when he died, when the men, his friends, followers and apostles, had fled for fear of the Romans. They hid, not even there to see him die, to lay out his cold, lifeless body, but I was there, watching as the sky went dark and the life left him, just as I had been there when he was born and the sky lit up. At the end, I helped his mother wash and wrap his broken, bruised and beaten body, in the same way as 30 years earlier, we had washed and swaddled him as a beautiful newborn baby. I remember so clearly that night when he was born in the company of women. Nothing was the same after that. Something as simple as the birth of a baby brought such pain, and yet so much change, so much love, such a remarkable time, such a baby. I was his midwife. This is my story. And for me, that's where it came from. And I said this to you when I first wrote to you, and I said, Mary was human, and that's the whole point. And I really wanted to speak to the missing women who were there at the beginning, at the end, but also to the humanity of Mary, and to see her as a human. Because every time she's presented, we get all the holy lights and angels around Mary, and it misses the point. The point is the divinity that is in all humanity. I think that it totally misses that. So I wanted to speak to the normalness, really, of the birth, which I think is important. And throughout here, how important women are, but also it's, as I say, and I think I keep saying it isn't a story about Jesus. This is the framework that you would recognize. It's a story about ritual and friendship and transformation and all of those things as much, but shining a light on the bits of the Bible that we don't see. We're just presented with this holiness, and I'm interested in the humanity. I'm interested in the people and the stories.
So how did you go about researching the book and all the practices that you talk about? Because it could almost be used, I feel, as kind of a manual for birth workers. Like it really jumps off the page as a very practical book, as well as something that's very evocative of times past. And obviously you didn't manage to jump on a plane and jet back 2,000 years. So how did you go about researching it?
So the births, I have spent 20 years not just teaching about birth, but making the effort to go and sit at the feet of the greats of childbirth. So everybody from going to learn from Ina May Gaskin, who wrote Spiritual Midwifery, to Robin Lynn, who still runs a free-to-access clinic in Bali with amazing midwifery skills. Last month, and again in 2016, I travelled to go and work with an amazing Indigenous midwife, Angelina Martinez, Miranda's Martinez, got to get the right way around, who very much reminds me of Salome, because she learned about midwifery from her mother and her grandmother before her, and practices things like closing the bones and that using of rebozo and cloths to reposition babies. She knows about herbs, and what is beautiful when you sit at her feet is she is so woman focused. She will see a woman all the way through the pregnancy, be there at the birth, and then look after her postnatally. And every story she tells starts and ends, and in the middle, there is the word love. She is surrounded with it. So one of the births in here is a birth, it is very similar to a birth that I attended as a birth supporter, as a doula. Some of them, so the breech birth, I learned about breech from Mary Cronk, who was one of the most famous breech midwives in the UK, sadly died a couple of years ago. But if you look at her obituary, she's described as the Queen of Breech. So there is all of this knowledge of attending births and being with families as they journey, from pregnancy through to postnatal, because that tends to be when I see people. So I'll meet them during their pregnancy. Whether or not I'm with them at the birth, I quite often speak to them around it and about it, and then almost always will be in contact with them afterwards. So a lot of that, it was very important to me. It was really meaningful to tell that story of how maternity could look with women who are well supported as well. So that's the one side. When I first decided, and I really started to write earnestly, I sat down with 3 Jewish antenatal teachers who very kindly gave me their time. One very orthodox and 2 quite separated now from the traditions about sort of what should I be aware of, what do I need to be cautious around language and customs. So that was incredibly useful. And then they put me in touch with a female rabbi who, when I'd finished it, was kind enough to read it for me and say yes. So one of the things I've got was originally one of the festivals I put in. She said, "Oh no, that wasn't invented till 400 AD. So it's not that. Use this one instead." And just a little bit of help with that. I have a spreadsheet now of Palestinian herbs and their medicinal uses. I have the trees of the Holy Land and the Middle East, and herbs and spices, and a phenomenal amount of reading in terms of what would have been available and how it was used and things like that. And there was so much more in terms of plant and herb lore that I could have put into the book. But for me, that was just, it was a delight to research. I spent 3 whole days looking at how nomadic tribes create their tents and what they might use to build them and how they store them and what they look like, and just trying to picture, you know, what would be the right type for my time and everything. So, but I kind of enjoy doing it. Once I decide on something, I would get to scurry off and go and try and find out as much. And then anyone who's written a book knows you've got the problem solving in your head. So my best bits were done on dog walks. I'm forever doing the just press record on my phone as I would work out something else or think of something else that somebody needed to say.
Oh, I've lost you.
Oh.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second for that last bit, but that could just have been me. It could all be fine on the other end.
The rest of you hear me? Did everyone hear me? That's the main thing. Yeah, right. So I was just saying, you're just pressing record to catch those extra bits that you think, oh, that's important. But yes, so much.
Paula, would you mind muting yourself, please, Paula? Thank you.
So you know, it's been quite a fascinating journey. Things like some of the positions and things I'd learned from, interestingly, both Angelina, so from Mexico. I did some work with an Ecuadorian woman who came from one of the Ecuadorian hill tribes, and she used very similar techniques. And then you see, again, some of them in spinning babies. So lots of the skills that she used, I know have been used around the world in all sorts of different settings as well. Yeah. So that, yeah, all of that. It's been quite a fascinating journey.
It was a really educational book to read, but not in a kind of a worthy way. You were learning and absorbing so much and seeing so much familiar stuff, but kind of all together in this really multi-sensory, evocative place that I've never been to, and yet you brought totally alive for me. So that's what I really loved about the book. And I make no secret of the fact that I've always wanted to. I'm a total birth junkie myself. I've had 3 home births, and so the sort of care that I received was not identical to, but reminiscent of what you were writing about. You know, I had a midwife the whole way through. She was there with me when I gave birth at home. My children and my husband were there around me. Then she came, you know, to care for me in the weeks afterwards. So I was, in some ways, I would say very fortunate, but I fought very hard for that, in that in Ireland, home birth midwives lost their insurance cover during my second pregnancy. So we had to protest, we had to get articles written and, you know, go to the health authorities, go to government and rattle every door that we could to demand change. So it in part was a privilege, and in part was something that I fought very, very hard for, because I believe in it very, very strongly. And I know that home birth isn't for everybody, but for me, I wouldn't have been able to access modern hospital healthcare. For me, that is just, I have a deep trauma thing when it comes to hospitals and hospitalization. So it would have been really, really hard for me to give birth in a hospital setting. So just to read all of that's to say, I've always wanted to have a book for Womancraft that was about birth, because I am passionate about birth and about birth being supported in ways that are most supportive of women and babies, rather than prioritizing hospitals' needs and all the concerns that tend to muddy the waters nowadays, rather than the primary focus.
You lost you again there, Lucy, just at
being the woman giving birth. but I didn't want to Martin are out there doing a fabulous job. So, you know, we didn't need to do a birth manual, but this was just the perfect birth book for me, because it is practical, it is real, and yet it is also taking part in a fictional world and telling a story that hasn't been told yet.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's what I wanted. I wanted to write the book I wanted to read, which was a book that taught me skills and was interesting, and I learned stuff. And I got to do that while I was writing it, and I hope you got to do that while you were reading it, because that was what I wanted to do. I knew exactly what I wanted to read, and that was it. that was the thing. But you're quite right, and I think that modern maternity, and we should be able to have that experience in a hospital. But it completely ignores the fact that birth is a rite of passage, that birth is an incredible potential moment of transformation, that sometimes it is, and those of you who've read it will know that I talk about this journey through birth, and this it's almost in the terms of warrior. And I think it was the Incas who used to give women a small shield when they went into labor, to signify the battle that they were going to fight. And if you died in childbirth, you were buried with full warrior honors, because you had gone to, it was considered that sort of the status of the act of childbirth, and it was recognized as this transformational journey that she went through. And I think that's what we have lost so much of. And I don't think it's an accident that women have been disempowered around birth, that they have had this control and this power and this ability to self-transform taken away from them. Because a woman who has been empowered, who has walked the hot coals of fire and come out the other side, can feel very powerful. And, you know, I don't think that's always wanted, that women will, you know, find themselves, be transformed and be really powerful. I don't think the two things are unconnected. I really don't.
No, I don't either. And, you know, it's, for me, birth was the most transformational experience of my life. And, you know, each of the three births was very different, but it's something that I am incredibly sad that I will never get to do again, and very glad that I got to in a way that enabled me to experience it and connect with it fully in my own power and fully supported.
And I think that's really important, because if you're listening to this or you're watching this and you didn't have the birth that you want, I think it is really important to recognize that that's not on you, that's on a system that is disempowering and isn't supportive and isn't respectful of this incredible experience that we go through. I mean, I'm coming to you today from Shropshire in the middle of the UK. And the local hospital here is the one that has made the national headlines for baby deaths. It is the Shrewsbury Antelope Hospital. Now, I don't work there, but the way that families were treated, the way that care was just, well, it's so. Don't read the report if you are, you know, if any of you are pregnant, do not go anywhere near the report. But it was abusive. It was deeply abusive. So if your birth experience was not empowering and it was not positive, that's not on you. That is on a society that has not yet created the environment where you were allowed to, and it doesn't matter how your birth goes, but you should have felt supported and empowered all the way through. And whether that's planned cesarean or whether that is a home water birth, that it should have been a more positive experience, because it's the birth of a new human with all that fantasticness. Yeah.
And the birth of a mother who is going to be there to support and care and nurture that little life. And if she isn't cared for, then she can't do that really important work.
Yeah, it has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? And it is. I think if one thing Ockenden should have taught us this report in the UK, and it's not. This is not specific to the UK. I believe in Australia, something like a third of women going through birth are reporting obstetric violence. You see similar numbers in the States and Canada, and in so many countries this is problematic. But it's all very well sort of pointing the finger at you. And you've just got to go through and think, well, what is causing this problem? How do we solve this? So, you know, you can't, it's that whole adage, isn't it, about, you know, you're pulling sheep out of the river rather than going up and finding out what's making them fall in further up. And I think that there is a much bigger thing to be addressed here in terms of maternity worldwide, and respect for bodily autonomy and women within it. But that's not for today. That's another one. But yeah, but I wanted to speak to those who didn't have a positive experience. What's been interesting is some people who've written to me who read it, who didn't have the birth they wanted, have said that it's made them think differently about their experience, in terms of not this is what I didn't get, but what I would like to have had, and how did that come about? And I think that's a really important conversation to have. Yeah, really important.
I think the more information that women can have about what birth looks like in all of its different phases, stages, colors, and ways that it can play out, I think is just vital. You know, the more that we know, you know, the stories of birth, the multitude of stories around birth, I think the stronger, the more empowered we are, and the more able we are to navigate when things don't go as we were perhaps hoping or expecting.
Yeah, and to know that it is actually one of the most physically intense things you will ever do. I think that's really important. So it was so interesting when I first started teaching 20 years ago. One born every minute was the whole new thing, and you know, families would come in to the expecting parents would come into the class, and the only thing they'd ever seen about birth on TV was Hollywood birth, one born every minute, with women on their back screaming and out of control. And this was the only model that they knew. Now there's the Instagram little 3-minute kind of clip of a woman laboring beautifully in her birth pool at home with the fairy lights, and everything's fine and she's completely calm. And to be honest, neither of those two examples tell the whole story, because you know, the one born every minute was designed to play you like a fiddle. It was designed to pull out the emotions in you. But the Instagram doesn't show the bit where mum is struggling, doesn't want to do it, decides it's a really bad idea, might be crying, might be getting the shakes, feeling a bit sick, which, to be honest, it always happens in birth. There's always a little bit. And so these stories that we tell, and the realism of it, I think is really empowering, to know what you are going into. It's like the old days when people wouldn't be talking about periods and things. And that the disasters that would happen when girls would start their period, nobody had told them that this is perfectly normal, and the upset is normal, that women would go through, because they didn't know how to deal with it. Whereas the more we tell these stories of the journey, the more empowered we are going into them.
I totally agree. And I mean, that is one of the major reasons for Womancraft's existence, is so that we get to share the stories of what it means to be a woman, the different stages of initiation, physical and emotional and spiritual, that we go through, stories that have been hidden, stories that have been silenced. And the more stories we hear, the more we know that we are not alone in our own experiences.
I think that's really important. And again, coming back to, we started before, was about Mary, you know, the lost story of Mary, the way that she is presented. But thinking of her as being very human, but also thinking about the people that would have been around her. I love the idea of her having perfectly normal friendships, and the support and the sisterhood and the whole journey that they go on. And I had a bit of a dilemma in the book, because I did want to go in. I'm quite interested in Mary Magdalene, and I did want to have a little bit more of a play in that one. But sometimes you just got to stick to your script. I mean, you got to stick to your lane. But I thought it was just amazing to decentralize and take away, to bring the humanity back. And I'm assuming you've all read it, because it's like spoilers, you know. But that was why the three kings were so interesting to me as well, and their role. and challenging these views that we have been given. Because to be honest, I didn't know where to put them in, but they've always annoyed me, because they rock up, you know, give gifts and then leave. And there's always, every Christmas, you see those little cartoons, don't you, that if they'd been the three wise women, they would have turned up with a casserole and some nappies and something really practical. And we've all gone, yes, that is what we would do. That would be much more help. But actually, the kings, they annoyed me for ages, because I think, well, if you've gone to all the trouble to recognize that this baby is important, you wouldn't just turn up, give a gift and go away. And to me, again, it's about representation. So one of the things that has always fascinated me is that Christianity was in Ethiopia in the for 1 AD. 1 AD. It was right there at the very, very start, which is really, really interesting. And so for me, it was incredibly important that the kings didn't just turn up and give gifts. If you think about what they are, they're actually magi, but that means that they are advisors to kings, that they are the people who would form the princes, that they would teach the next generation of the powerful. So that's their job. They're kingmakers. So they turn up. And it was very, very important to me that one of those kings was from Ethiopia, which then links us back to how it arrived in Ethiopia in 1 AD. And I love the idea then, rather than Christianity being something that the great white saviors arrived in Africa and said, let us, you know, educate you all in this, that actually Jesus would have been taught by a black man from Ethiopia. Oh, that made me very happy. Because again, it's like the women being written out of the story. You know, the whole Christian story has been whitewashed, hasn't it? And it's not, you don't think of it as being a very Jewish story, and that is actually what it begins with. And to have this other elements to it, I thought was really, well, for me, really exciting. That was the thing. I thought of that on a dog walk. I literally stood in the middle of the field and went, oh, and just press record. Oh, I got it. Well, the other dog walkers must have thought of me, stood in the middle of the field, literally kind of jumping around with excitement. Anyhow, I have a reputation apparently.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I regularly find myself in the woods kind of talking into my phone because I've had an idea. So.
Best place. Your inspiration strikes in the woods.
So this feels like a good point to open it up. Sorry, we're I think we're at slightly lagged intervals. I was just saying, I think this is a good point to open it up to our audience in case anyone has a question that they'd like to ask you. There's no pressure to do so, but if you would like to just unmute yourself and ask away.
Nancy, have you got one?
Yes, I do.
Everyone's avoiding us.
Pardon?
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. I'm intrigued by the birthstones. I love rock of all kinds. It speaks to me. I love the mountains. I love the pebbles at the beach. And I do believe that spiritual happening gets recorded in stones somehow. No idea the physics of that. And that was, I was so pleased to discover this. I'm reading it and Jesus has just been born.
Oh, give me some spoilers, so sorry.
So it's very exciting. And I had a moment with my granddaughter of when she was 15 minutes old, of looking in her eyes and she looking in mine, and that bonding and that sense of love flowing from me and wrapping around her, swaddling her with love was just amazing. But tell me more about the stones.
Great question.
Yeah, so the birthstones are quite fascinating Birth stools have been used in pretty much every culture. So it is much, much, much more normal for women to give birth in upright positions. The history of childbirth is not always recorded. But where there are statues, where there are carvings, women are upright. And very often, stools could be women. But you'll see a number. Lucy, can I just mute you for 1 second? Is that okay? We'll see if it's you.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a number of carvings where women are literally on stacks of stones. So 1 stone or stones. And there are a number of cultures that use birth stones. But I'm exactly with you, Nancy, when I was thinking about them and I was looking into different uses of them, and you see sometimes they're put into piles for women to stand on or kneel on. A number of cultures where they would be in the rectangle with their feet on. But I love that idea of, as you say, infusing with the power of birth. And you can't help but draw that comparison at the tablets of knowledge of commandments and these tablets of power. So there were 2 things going on. There's the birth stones that are used in the schools, but also these. And you've got to think about the Israelites as having traveled across the desert. So yes, this was the thing. You couldn't cart a big stone carved, because that would be heavy. Even in sandstone, that's pretty heavy to cart. And so finding the thing that they could take, that could be this connection to heritage, that could help you to birth, it made sense that they would be portable. It made sense that they would be the stone of the region. And the beauty of sandstone is we have a lovely pink sandstone here. So I know how it works, I know how it feels, I know how it molds and it shapes, and it would wear beautifully under the feet, so you would have these shaped patterns. But for me, it was really important that they were not just physical aids to birth, but spiritual and emotional aids as well. In as you say, they're almost infused with the power of all women before them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Has anybody else got a question for us? If not, then I'm going to ask you if there's a little passage you'd like to finish.
Give me a second.
Can I ask, Nancy, you've silenced yourself. Hazel, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
The first 40 days, I visit Mary daily, tending to her, bringing her nourishment, massaging her belly, rewrapping her, helping her master the art of breastfeeding and learn about mothering her little one. She's an absolute delight with him. He and Joseph both are. They are always cuddling and kissing him, chatting, singing him songs. Mary carries him with him wherever she moves, his tiny form bound to her body in a big shawl. She is still not to do any manual labor, but she does sit and sew when Jesus sleeps. They had stayed in the stable for the first 8 days, and then as some of the guests left, Lee and Gads, and now Mary is out of the initial post-birth period, they were able to move into a guest room in the house. Lee had been at the door first thing in the morning after the birth. I'll never forget the utter wonder on her face as she held the baby for the first time. Her usually distracted face softening to the most heartwarming smile as she held and rocked the tiny baby and whispered the most loving welcome and prayers into his ears. While she had never been blessed with her own child, her heart had not been hardened like some who are so cruelly rendered barren. It takes so much in our society from those women not being able to cross the threshold to motherhood and robbing them of status in my society. I do not know why God will bless some women with wombs that make healthy babies as easily as a tree grows a fruit, and some that cannot. It seems a cruel unfairness. Lee comes out whenever she can to help Mary and see Jesus. She sends food and pays a boy from the village to gather the fresh meadow every day, and it is she who organizes the Brit Milah, or the circumcision for Jesus, in accordance with tradition. And to everyone's surprise, On the morning, a lamb arrives for the celebration from Uzel, a gift from the shepherds. And I wanted to just put that bit in. I literally just opened up and I thought, yeah, that one. Because it's about the normalness immediately, that's the initial period of complete normal happenings after the baby is born. And I wanted to sort of put in there, I mean, there's other things that happen in the book that are much more exciting, but I wanted to talk about this actual normal rite of passage, this introduction of love, and to think of this baby being held in the cradle and these people coming in, supporting mum with love and care, and what a difference that makes.
Thank you so much.
That's, you know, those are the little stories, aren't they, that make a tale and make a lifetime.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you for sharing your vision for what probably happened, and for your vision for what birth can and will look like in the future for women, and for this beautiful little book, which I hope everybody watching will share with their friends this Christmas as a lovely seasonal read. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And happy nearly Christmas.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along this evening. It's been lovely. And Nancy, I hope you enjoy the rest of the book. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what you think. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you ever so much.
Bye now.